Canada is getting absolutely steamrolled by America, but specifically President Donald Trump. With the increase on the tariffs, with the ongoing trade war, and also with the forceful voluntold, like Canada, we're being voluntold to participate in this golden dome, we are set up for absolute failure. Or dare I say, bankruptcy. So we're going to be taking a look at a lot of information in this video that's going to explain and validate what I just said. Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to another video, everybody. Before we get into it, I do want to encourage you all to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. It does really help grow the channel. And before we get into the video, I do have a message from today's sponsor. When I prepare my videos, I make sure that I know both sides of the story. That's why I use Ground News, and that's why I've partnered with them. Ground News is a website and app that pulls sources from thousands of different websites across the internet, organizes them by story, and shows you a visual breakdown of the political bias, ownership, and reliability. Take this story that's barely getting any attention to South Korea's bold arms deal to supply Canada with fighter jets and submarines instead of the United States. You'd think something like this would be on the front page, but apparently it's not. Ground News shows us that over 30 sources have covered the actual story. 67% of it is actually coming from the right. Left-leaning media outlets like CBC and Global News do cover the story, but they keep it surface level. Meanwhile, right-leaning outlets like 1945 dig deeper to point out the serious concerns about Canada's vulnerabilities. I actually found the story my favorite spot of Ground News, the blind spot feed, which is where I go to find out which side is or isn't covering the story. Subscribe to my link down in the description or use the QR code on screen to get 40% off the Vantage plan today. That's the exact same plan that I use. Thank you, Ground News, for sponsoring today's video. We are going to start off the video by taking a look at the ongoing trade war, specifically the escalation, the recent escalation by America, or even more specifically by Donald Trump, and Canada's response to the matter.
CBC News has confirmed new information about Ottawa's trade talks with the U.S., talks that Mark Carney has called intensive. The CBC's Karina Roman joins me live. So, Karina, what have we learned?
Well, we've learned from sources familiar with those intensive talks that there have been direct discussions between Prime Minister Mark Carney and U.S. President Donald Trump since his visit to the Oval Office. In fact, that there have been a few phone calls in the evenings and exchanged text messages about the trade talks since that meeting in Washington. So it's not just been senior officials from both countries meeting. It's been at the very top, those discussions. And that speaks to how much Ottawa wants some kind of deal, at least on tariffs, before the G7, which is only 2 weeks away and which Canada is hosting. And this is something, of course, that was asked of Industry Minister Mélanie Joly today. Here's what she had to say.
First of all, this is a trade war, so it's perfectly normal that as that trade war is progressing, that there be diplomatic discussions between Prime Minister Carney and President Trump. They are talking. Having said that, I can also say that we mustn't be naive. We have to continue to protect ourselves and support our own workers right now. And we're clearly seeing that the 50% tariff is an escalation against all countries that produce steel and aluminum.
It absolutely is an escalation, and it feels like this is just no longer anything to do with our border security, with drugs, crime, any of that stuff. It just feels like this is America trying to pick a fight with mostly the rest of the world, but also Canada. It's very bizarre. Anyways, I'd love to know what you guys think down below in the comments about that. Let's see what the rest of CBC has to say about the matter.
Now, there's been some speculation that because of the sensitivity and the high level of these talks, that's what's behind what some people characterize as a hesitation by the government to hit back right away against these 50% tariffs from the U.S. with our own escalation to 50% tariffs on U.S. steel and aluminum. And yet you have people, including those who represent the steel industry and their workers here in Ottawa, meeting with ministers and MPs, pushing for such retaliation, wanting Canada to up the ante to match those tariffs to 50%, and also additional tariffs on countries that engage in unfair trade, those places like China, who are accused of dumping cheap steel into Canada and into the U.S. Ontario Premier Doug Ford supporting that immediate retaliation, or at least not waiting too long for making that kind of action. Have a listen to what he had to say.
The ideal situation is to get a deal, and if that deal does not happen in the next few days, then we have to slap another 25% tariff on top of the existing 25% tariff on our aluminum steel.
And of course, the steel industry saying that, even if there is a deal with Donald Trump, can it really be trusted? Everyone knowing, and including Doug Ford in that scrum, saying, Donald Trump could wake up the next day and change his mind. And so Canada has to do what it can do, regardless of what's happening in terms of those intensive talks.
And, excuse me, Karina, in addition to retaliation, the steel and aluminum industry is also looking for support from the government. What are they looking for exactly?
Well, they're obviously pleased to hear, and they've said this, that there is now all this talk about onshoring, using domestic supply of aluminum and steel in these new nation-building projects that keep getting talked about, or when we want to invest more in defense and new defense procurement. But those are not immediate solutions. Those are not now supports, which are needed for jobs that could be lost within days, if not weeks, because of these onerous tariffs. And so with the Prime Minister repeatedly saying that all the revenue from Canada's retaliatory tariffs and counter tariffs would go towards supporting these industries and the workers in those industries that are most affected. Lots of questions about how that would work, and is that money going to flow soon? And if so, what's the criteria for it flowing? And not really getting answers back, at least not today, from Melanie Joly, nor in question period with the opposition asking about that. So perhaps the steel companies who are meeting with the ministers and the MPs might get some clarity on that. But at this point, Canadians still don't know how that money is going to be used to support those industries, and those industries saying they need it quickly.
Since we are on the topic of Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, that was only a little snippet of a longer, a longer video, I guess, that Doug Ford had said. So let's take a look at a longer clip of Doug Ford in that same setting.
Well, I think guns a-blazing starts if President Trump says, no, we don't have a deal. We're going to continue tariffing your country. I find it ironic that China is getting a better treatment than its closest friends and allies. That's unacceptable. We should be the first country in line to get a fair trade deal because it benefits Americans and Canadians. I really believe that he's short-sighted. He's not seeing the forest beyond the trees right now, President Trump, because at the end of the day, it's going to hurt Americans across the board. Anything that's produced by steel, we've seen it. The cost has gone up 16% because of his actions. What the problem is China. They're shipping in steel, slapping a flag of certain countries on their steel and saying, hey, it was made here. Well, it's not made there. That's the flow we have to stop. I mentioned that to the Prime Minister, and the President has to realize that as well. Everything's on the table right now. Hopefully that we won't come to that. Let's try to strike a deal in the best interest of Americans and Canadians.
Let me know if you guys think that this is a proportional response to America or if this is Canada's way of just escalating things further. I do agree that we should be doing something. We shouldn't just be steamrolled by America. It feels like the president is picking a fight with everybody on whatever reason he possibly can, including people that are directly close to him, like Elon Musk. If you caught that drama yesterday on the internet, that was absolutely insane. If you didn't, just go and do some research. We're not going to be talking about it, but Elon Musk and Trump are going to war and it is bad. But specifically getting back to the stuff here on Canada, I think that the government is full of peacocking. That's all they're doing is puffing up their chest going, we're going to fight back. We're going to fight back. But they never actually do, which is why Mark Carney during the federal election literally pulled back any dollar for dollar retaliatory tariffs and then campaigned on elbows up on the fact that he's going to go up against America. So a little bit contradicting, but hey, that's liberals for you. And speaking of Mark Carney, He was stopped in the hallway in Parliament, and he had this to say.
On the trade data, $15 billion of exports just went out the window kind of thing. Chamber's quite worried.
Look, the global economy is slowing. We all know that, and that has implications for Canada. We're a trading nation. The core strategy of this government is to diversify our economy, build our economy at home. You don't want to make too much of one piece of data, but there's lots of indicators underneath that the strategy that we're pursuing to build the Canadian economy, to be masters in our own home, to have one Canadian economy out of 13, to diversify our trading partners, that's the right strategy for Canada. Thanks very much.
I gotta say, Mark Carney feels and sounds pretty confident with what's going on. It feels like he's got it all. Well, it doesn't feel like he's got it all figured out. It feels like he thinks he's got it all figured out. But for our sake, I hope that he's right. I hope that we're going to be okay, and that, you know, breaking down interprovincial trade barriers is a way for us to make money and prosper. But that's just moving money around Canada. Ultimately, eventually, we have to start expediting our sales of stuff to other countries. We wish that that could be America, but it feels like that's no longer a possibility. Burnt bridges, relationships are collapsing. We don't really know what exactly is going to happen with that long term, but again, we're just gonna have to wait and see. Next, we're taking a look at this recent video that CBC put together talking about Canada's involvement with the Golden Dome and if Trump can actually build it without Canada, which would be good, but also bad because we need some form of a protection. So let's take a look at this video.
When we think about what threats the U.S. is most worried about, Russia, North Korea, China, Iran, they're all on the other side of the world, meaning two things. The U.S. needs to be able to shoot down long-range cruise missiles, hypersonic weapons, intercontinental ballistic missiles, and they need to consider what direction those projectiles might come from. Could they reach the U.S. by flying over the Pacific or Atlantic Oceans? Sure, but that's hardly the shortest distance. You can shave off around a quarter of that trip if instead of going east or west, you go north.
If you look at a map of the world or a globe and you look at it straight from the north, you can see the most direct path for, let's say, Russia and China is going to go right through the Arctic. It's basically the path by which any attack that comes to North America is going to fly over.
Now, from space, satellites can see a missile launch pretty easily by picking up the sudden blast of heat, but actually tracking the flight path of something hurtling through the air at several times the speed of sound while the Earth is spinning and the satellites are moving themselves. That's a lot harder. So you need ground-based radar in your detection toolkit too. So if we go back to our example of Russia targeting Washington with a hypersonic missile, let me see if I can see it here. So let's say it's launching from right on the Kazakhstan border, and that rocket, that missile, flies over the Arctic Circle and towards Washington, D.C. Most likely the first ground-based radar that'll be able to track it in real time would be in Canada's far north, meaning Canada isn't just a bystander in a conflict like this, it's the front line.
If you look at just how high latitude a lot of these islands are,
I don't even know if there's an argument to make on whether Canada needs or doesn't need a missile defense system. Like, without a doubt, 1,000 times over, yes. And we don't need it tomorrow. We need it yesterday, many days before yesterday, in fact, because missiles are increasing their range. And now with these new hypersonic missiles that go into lower orbit, it's not out of the realm of possibilities for Middle Eastern countries around the world to, I don't want to say quite easily target North America, but yeah, kind of, sort of, quite easily target North America, specifically Canada. We have literally no defense, nothing. If a missile comes for Canada of any capacity, there's not really a thing that we can do about it. America might try to intercept it, or they might just prepare for their own, their own war. But Canada is left completely vulnerable, especially in the Arctic. Oh my goodness. So we desperately need a missile defense system.
It can provide potentially also an earlier warning for potential strikes if there are radar sites or other systems in there.
And we can put some rough numbers to this point about early warning. Let's go back to that scenario where a hypersonic missile is traveling from Russia to Washington, D.C. And let's make some assumptions. First, that the missile is traveling at Mach 8. That's 8 times the speed of sound. And it's traveling at about that speed the whole way. In reality, these kinds of missiles have different flight phases where they can travel at different speeds, but let's just keep it simple. So it's hurtling through the air and then up through space at almost 10,000 kilometers an hour, which is almost 3 kilometers per second. We're looking here at a total approximate flight time of about 56 minutes. A conventional ground-based radar in Canada's north might be able to start tracking that missile about 32 minutes into its flight. So T-minus 24 minutes to impact.
Flight times for a lot of these systems is basically measured in tens of minutes, right? And every minute counts.
But now, imagine that same radar is placed much further south, say near the Canada-US border. At that point, you might not be able to effectively track that missile until it's only about 6 minutes away, which is just moments before its terminal stage of plummeting towards Earth from space at maximum speed.
If you're aware of a threat or a potential threat 2,000 miles away, vice 200 miles away, as a leader of a country, you can pick up the phone and have a conversation with the leader of another country for deterrent effects.
That gives us more decision space. It gives us more options. We want to be able to call out bad behavior and say, we know what you're doing and we have a prepared response for you.
Now,
without a doubt, again, Canada needs to increase defense spending. And this is where, the whole campaigning of the Conservatives versus the Liberals was drastically different. Carney waited to see how much Pierre would say that he would want to campaign or how much money he would put into our military. And then he copied it at a lower level. And then now brags about our GDP increasing, yet doesn't really do anything, like hasn't put more money into our military, put more money into contractors or into, not contractors, consultants, but isn't putting more money into our military. Can't even get approval for a pipeline, for crying out loud. How is Carney going to get approval for any military funding? Canceled F-35s or F whatever, right? Like, it's just bizarre. It's bizarre that our prime ministers our liberal prime ministers keep underfunding our military, leaving us more vulnerable than ever until the inevitable happens where at some point, might not be in the next few years, might not be in the next 10 or dozens of years, but at some point, Canada is going to face some form of military action here on our soil. Question is, do we want to be prepared or do we want to be vulnerable?
You might be thinking, okay, but the U.S. isn't just the lower 48 states, right? There is northern radar coverage in Alaska, for example, even in Greenland, for that matter. And that's true. But those radar stations only really cover a relatively narrow slice of Arctic approaches. Meanwhile, Canada's northern landmass spans roughly 25% of the Earth's circumference at the Arctic Circle, giving it the capacity to detect threats from many angles.
If you look at the nature of the width that Canada has in the north, in the Arctic, it's a pretty significant gap if we didn't work together with the United States to cover this area.
So yes, Canada's geography makes it invaluable to American missile defense. But of course, it's not just about land. It's about what this country has built and is building on that land.
We're not doing enough.
Canada understands missile defense. It's been part of NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, since it was established back in 1958. And by the 1980s, Canada became a key player, pouring serious money into building out a chain of radar stations stretching from Yukon to Labrador.
You have done a lot for since 1958 with NORAD. You funded 40% of the North Warning System or the systems up front.
Now,
What I would like to see is Canada be known for having a proper missile defense system and missile detection systems, right? Right now, the only country that's we've seen at least that has a very good missile defense system is Israel with their Iron Dome. Right, you see it all the time when they get bombed by Hezbollah and stuff like that. They shoot their own rockets, and it's like explosions in the sky. I don't want that for Canada. Like, I don't want to see explosions in our sky, but I want us to have the infrastructure already set up. And I feel like we are not utilizing, I know it's very hard to do it, but we're not utilizing our north the way we should be. Establish more military presence up there. Put more technology and funding up there. It's going to create more jobs. Yeah, it's harsher conditions. Yeah, it's going to suck for the people that have to patrol those bases and be a part of it, but somebody's got to do it. And we sure as heck are being put in a way more vulnerable position by not capitalizing on our land mass.
Those systems, as far as we know, haven't actually ever had to deal with an incoming missile threat. But that's kind of the way it's supposed to work. Missile defense almost being more about deterrence than actually having to intercept threats all the time. And that's not to say they haven't been useful in other ways, too. Just one example, recently spotting both Russian and Chinese bombers flying near Alaska, aircraft capable of carrying dozens of cruise missiles.
Some of what NORAD does, which is to warn of any incoming air threats and aerospace threats, that is going to be part of Golden Dome, because in order to be able to defeat a variety of missiles, you have to be aware that they're incoming.
We are over 60% of the northern approaches is covered by Canada or more, depending on how you calculate it. Our sensors are pretty vital for being able to detect threats coming from that axis.
And that's especially true when you consider how Canada is investing tens of billions of dollars into new radar systems on its own, with the goal of taking its threat spotting power to a whole new level.
What we need to be able to do is see around the curvature of the Earth as far away as possible, because that's most likely where the launch points are going to be.
Yeah, this is where things get a bit more sophisticated. Most traditional radar systems can only see as far as the horizon, like looking straight ahead on a flat road.
60 miles or something like
another
that.
special kind of radar that can see beyond the curvature of the Earth. These over-the-horizon radar systems work by shooting high-frequency radio waves up into the sky and bouncing them off the upper atmosphere back down to the surface. This lets you see threats from thousands of kilometers away. The U.S. currently has one of these systems looking out over the southern horizon, monitoring threats from Central and South America. It's also investing in at least two more to keep an eye on the Pacific. But what it doesn't have is one looking north. Canada, though, is building two such systems right
Awesome.
now.
We've just recently let a contract to build the first set of them. For the foreseeable future, it is probably the main system that we're going to invest in.
According to the Canadian government, these new systems include an Arctic over-the-horizon radar and a polar over-the-horizon radar. Both
I think it said completion date, if we go back in one of the columns here. Scheduled for definition phase, scheduled for initial operation, scheduled for full operational capability. So in 2031 for the over the Arctic radar, and the other one in 2033. So again, that's still quite a ways away. We would prefer it to be ready as of yesterday, but this is at least good. It's a good step in the right direction that Canada is building a couple of these. That's pretty freaking clutch. I didn't know this. I honestly didn't know this. And I don't know who would have greenlit this. Maybe Trudeau. I think it's too early for Carney to have given the green light to this, but regardless, it's still good. It's still good.
over-the-horizon radar, both intended to provide early warning radar coverage and expected to be fully operational by 2031 and 2033. Those are expected to give Canada even more lead time over and above the detection capabilities that we calculated earlier.
With the over-the-horizon radar capability, now you're able to see several thousand miles. And so it may be a tenfold difference in timing that you gain on awareness of the launch platform.
And worth restating, these radar systems don't just detect incoming missiles from further away. It's their ability to see everything else, like a plane flying over the ocean, which might be carrying a hypersonic missile, or a space-based threat orbiting before it drops down into national airspace, or even a missile-armed warship deep in the Arctic Ocean.
Over-the-horizon capability is not just for missiles. It can see maritime all the way to space. So that's a significant contribution to overall domain awareness for potential threats to North America.
Our adversaries are increasingly emboldened. We cannot and should not look first to others to defend our nation.
Now, technically, these systems are still part of Canada's commitment to NORAD. So right now, the U.S. gets access to this tech too. But under the NORAD agreement, each country owns the assets it contributes. So when Canada builds and funds a radar system, it controls how it's operated, who can access the data, how alerts are managed, meaning, despite Trump's claims, Canada clearly does have something to offer besides money or its sovereignty.
As the NORAD commander and NORTHCOM commander, the last thing I wanted to be doing was shooting down missiles over North America. You're much better off deterring in the first place or going after the archer, not the arrow. And so Canada offers a lot when it comes to maritime awareness, airborne platform, and subsea.
Now look, it is important to remember that Canada is still not the superpower here, right? Canada does absolutely rely on American money and might for protection. But it's also true that defending this continent requires Canada's eyes and ears. There's just too much ground to cover, millions of square kilometers, which makes missile defense in North America a very complex problem to solve. So when Trump drops ultimatums like pay up or become the 51st state, Canada would seem to have at least some room to say, well, hold on, let's talk.
Well, I gotta say, that was a little bit more educational than what I was expecting. It's nice to know that Canada has some bargaining chips and that with the whole 51st state rhetoric and with the whole defense and military budgets, even though they are still these programs, this construction is not completed, Canada is bringing something to the table, which is quite good. I mean, the fact that we're not only having one of those systems built, but two of them is pretty phenomenal. We'll be able to see almost everything halfway around the world, which is better than what other countries can do unless they have bases on the other side of the world to then relay that information. So I gotta say, that's good. It's a step in the right direction. I don't hate to admit that, you know, what a liberal is doing is good, but those two programs are good. Can it be better? Yeah, of course. We can have three of them. We can have way more being done. But as one of his first acts to be green lighting, giving the green light to these projects, I gotta say, I'll give credit where credit is due. But I'd love to know your guys' thoughts and comments down below. Do you think that Canada should be doing more in terms of our defense? Do you think that this is adequate? Do you think that when these projects are finally built, that we'll have a better relationship with, you know, NATO, with NORAD, and specifically with America? I would love to know what you guys think down below in the comments. That, ladies and gentlemen, concludes this video. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. If you did, it'd be super awesome for you guys to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in another video. Bye for now.